The night before my sister's wedding, I came home to a house glowing with laughter and candlelight and a conversation that wasn't meant for me to hear. My parents and sister were in the living room deciding that I'd spend the ceremony babysitting 12 kids so they could save on help. After months of planning every perfect detail, I was reduced to background noise in their big day. That was the moment I realized love shouldn't feel like servitude. What would you have done if your family treated your devotion like a duty? Like, share, comment, and subscribe to us. We always appreciate the time you have with us. Let's begin. By Friday evening, the Delaney house looked like a magazine, spread lace runners, laid out candles clustered on the counter, floral garlands coiled like soft vines across the dining table. I'd been up since dawn, balancing between catering checklists and a frosting emergency, but when I stepped back and looked at it all, I could almost pretend it was effortless. Mom said that's what made me special. You make things look easy, sweetheart. The part she never said was how no one ever asked how much it cost me. Hannah sat on the bar stool swirling her mimosa. She was radiant, even in sweatpants, her nails already done, her hair in that smooth blonde bun that never fell out of place. Mara, you're a lifesaver, she said, stretching the words like they were a song. You've got the eye. Seriously, what would I do without you? I smiled, stacking dessert plates behind her. You'd have to hire someone, I said lightly. Mom Lydia laughed. Oh, don't be silly. That's what family's for. You two balance each other out. Hannah's the dreamer, and you're the doer. Perfect team. Dad Doug raised his glass from the corner where he'd been opening wine. To my girls, he said. Hannah, our star. Mara, our steady hand. Couldn't have asked for better daughters. They clinked glasses. I wiped icing off my wrist with a napkin, pretending I didn't notice that only one of those words, steady, ever belonged to me. I'd been the steady one since middle school. The one who remembered birthdays, baked cupcakes for class fundraisers, proofread college essays, and later, when Dad's business had its rough patch, balanced the household budget, while they told people at church everything was fine. I never minded, not really. There was something satisfying about fixing things before they broke. But lately, I'd started to wonder if all that steadiness had just made me invisible. The kitchen was humid with vanilla and heat. Hannah was flipping through photos of her bachelorette trip, giggling with Mom over which ones to post. I could hear them in the background while I adjusted the place cards, each name written in gold ink, each napkin folded to match the wedding's woodland romantic theme. You're so good at this, Mom said again, walking by with her phone in hand. You have such a gift for details. I keep telling people you should start your own business. I already did, I reminded her. It's just small right now. Oh, sure, she said absently, tapping at her screen. But nothing compares to working on something that matters. Family, you know? I swallowed the retort before it reached my tongue. Hannah's wedding did matter. It was just hard to remember that when no one else seemed to think I had a life outside of it. Dad popped open another bottle of champagne. You deserve a toast too, Mara, he said, though he didn't pour me a glass. You've made this weekend run smoother than any professional planner could. Your sister's lucky to have you. Hannah beamed. Totally. You should see the messages from the bridal party. They can't believe how organized everything is. They said I must have inherited your perfection gene. I gave a short laugh. Pretty sure that gene skips generations. No one heard me over their laughter. The sound of clinking glasses filled the kitchen again, the kind of laughter that photographs well, bright and effortless. I caught my reflection in the oven door, hair pinned back. Apron smudged, shoulders slightly hunched. I looked like part of the decor, a moving centerpiece. Hey, Mara, Hannah called, waving her phone. Do you think we should switch the table layout for the rehearsal dinner? I saw this Pinterest board where they did alternating long tables. It looked amazing. That would mean redoing the seating chart, I said. Right, but you're so fast at that stuff, she winked. You'll make it work. Of course I would. I always did. I picked up my notepad, making a mental list of what would need changing. Hannah was already back to chatting with Mom about honeymoon flights. Dad laughed about the price of champagne and how he'd earned this glass after surviving wedding planning. I bit my lip, reminding myself that none of them meant to be cruel. They just lived in a world where things appeared when needed: clean plates, chilled drinks, rearranged tables because I made them appear. The doorbell rang, and a rush of cousins filled the entryway, bringing noise and humidity with them. I welcomed them, ushered them toward the living room, made sure everyone had drinks. My nephew Owen ran past with a plastic sword, shouting about pirates. "Careful with that," I said automatically. He turned, grinning, and swung again. The sword caught the edge of a juice glass on the counter. Orange liquid splashed across the tablecloth, staining the ivory runner I'd ironed that morning. Mom gasped. "Oh, for heaven's sake! Mara, can you mop that up? We don't want it to set." I stood frozen for a second. Owen blinked up at me, unbothered. The others barely paused. Hannah was still talking about centerpieces. Dad was laughing with an uncle. Finally, I nodded. "Sure," I said quietly. "I'll handle it." I grabbed a towel, dabbing at the spill until the orange faded to a faint shadow. My hands moved on autopilot, but my chest felt tight, my throat raw. The runner looked almost new again, almost, but I could see where the fabric had warped slightly, a small wave under the candles. When the mess was gone, I stepped back and looked at the table. Everything sparkled again. Everything perfect as usual, but the perfection wasn't mine anymore. It felt borrowed, temporary, like I was keeping up someone else's illusion. The crowd drifted to the porch as the evening cooled, the air filled with laughter and the soft hum of cicadas. I stayed behind, wiping counters that didn't need wiping, collecting half-empty glasses. Outside, Mom's voice rose above the chatter. "We're so blessed to have a family that works together." I almost laughed out loud. Together. The kitchen emptied slowly until it was just me and the fairy lights I'd strung along the window earlier that afternoon. Their glow reflected off the glass, wrapping the room in soft gold. My own reflections stared back at me. Tired eyes, flour-dusted cheeks, a faint smile that looked too polite to be real. I set down the dish towel and whispered to the woman in the glass, "Maybe this time they'll see me." The lights flickered once, catching in my reflection like a heartbeat. Then, the moment passed, and the laughter from the porch drifted back in warm, unknowing, already moving on without me. The night air smelled like rain and pine when I pulled into the driveway, headlights sweeping across the porch. My car was packed with the last of the vendor confirmations, extra votives, ribbon spools, backup candles, every detail I double-checked for Hannah's big day. My hands ached from the steering wheel, and all I wanted was a shower and silence. The house glowed through the front windows, laughter floating out like music. I smiled out of habit more than joy. Inside, the hall smelled like lemon polish and vanilla cake. I dropped my keys on the table and started toward the kitchen, ready to unload. Then I stopped. Voices. Low and close. The kind of conversation that dips when someone shouldn't hear it. I took a quiet step closer. Mom's voice. Lydia was calm, practical. "It just makes sense. Mara's great with kids. She'll keep them busy during the reception. Saves us a fortune on childcare." My stomach tightened. Dad Doug chuckled. "Yeah, she'll do it. She always does. That's our Mara, steady as they come." I froze at the base of the stairs, one hand on the railing. My pulse thudded in my ears. Then Hannah's voice, bright and careless. "Perfect. She can watch them during my vows, too. We'll give her a shout-out at the reception, something sweet like, 'To my amazing sister who made this day possible.'" They all laughed. The sound was light, harmless if you didn't know what it meant. I pressed my palm against the wood banister until it creaked. The varnish was smooth beneath my fingers, but I dug my nails in anyway, felt them catch, leave little crescents behind. Mom sighed, content. "It's settled then. We'll just let her know on the morning of. No sense worrying her with it now." Dad agreed, his tone turning indulgent. "You know how she is. If we tell her early, she'll start overthinking it. Better to just tell her it's part of the plan. Part of the plan. My throat closed. The plan that I had built from nothing, the venue, the seating, the catering, the playlist, all of it. I'd mapped out every hour, every tablecloth fold, every scent of every candle. I'd spent months weaving this day together so Hannah could walk into it like a dream. And now I was the nanny. Hannah's laugh again, light and unbothered. 12 kids, right? Between the cousins and the ring bearers. She'll be fine. She's good with chaos. She's patient, Mom corrected. And she loves helping. They said it like a compliment, as if my patience were a renewable resource, as if loving them meant agreeing to anything. I felt the air thicken around me, heavy with something sour. I wanted to walk in there, throw open the door, and demand to know how they could sit in that kitchen I'd decorated, drink wine from glasses I'd polished, and plan to dump me with a dozen kids like it was nothing. But I knew exactly what would happen. Dad's dismissive wave, Mom's tight smile, Hannah's laugh, the same one that used to mean affection, but now sounded like a lock clicking shut. So I stayed where I was, listening, memorizing. Doug spoke again, his voice turning softer, almost proud. You girls are lucky, you know. Not every family pulls together like this. Especially with everything Mara's done, Mom added, and I almost let myself breathe until she continued. She's good at the practical stuff. Not everyone's meant to be in the spotlight. We all have our roles. Our roles. The words hit like cold water. My role was to make things run, to smooth the edges, to disappear behind the curtain, so their show could go on. I closed my eyes, felt my heartbeat steady into anger. They weren't just assigning me a chore. They were confirming what they'd always believed, that I was the supporting cast, reliable and invisible, existing to keep their lives comfortable. I could almost hear Kelsey's voice in my head. They use you because you let them. But this was different. This wasn't a favor or a habit. This was theft. They'd taken my work, my time, my love, and replaced it with an errand. I stepped back from the banister, careful not to make a sound. The hardwood was cool under my bare feet as I crossed the hall. I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror, pale, tired, a strand of hair plastered to my cheek. My mouth was open slightly, like I'd just run out of words. From the kitchen, laughter flared again. I couldn't make out the words now, just the tone, the easy certainty that everything would go their way, that I'd go along like always. I looked toward the living room. On the counter sat a single candle still burning from dinner, one of the dozens I'd bought for the centerpieces. Its flame swayed in the air, casting gold light on the framed family photo behind it, Hannah in her college cap, me beside her holding the bouquet I'd made from spare flowers that morning, my parents smiling, wide arms around her shoulders, not mine. I stared at that candle, watched the wick bend and flare. I could almost hear the conversation still echoing in the kitchen, their voices warm, satisfied, so sure they knew me. She'll do it. She always does. The words looped in my head until something inside me cracked. I felt it small but final, like glass under pressure. I took one last look at the photo, then at the flickering flame. It was beautiful, fragile, and it burned itself smaller every second it stayed lit. A draft slipped through the open window above the sink. The curtain shifted. The flame shuddered once, twice, then went out. The room fell dark, the smell of smoke thin and sharp in the air. I stood there for a long time, my hands still on the wall, the darkness thick and quiet around me. They didn't just assign me a chore, I whispered into the silence. They erased me. And for the first time in my life, I didn't move to relight the candle. The coffee shop was nearly empty, its last patrons hunched over laptops or whispering into mugs. Rain pressed against the windows in slow, steady sheets, the kind that blurred streetlights into gold smears. I sat in the corner booth, wedding binder open like a wound, its pages full of neat handwriting and color-coded tabs, every hour, every vendor, every promise I'd made to make someone else's dreams seamless. Kelsey slid into the seat across from me, shrugging off her raincoat. Her hair was damp curls escaping their tie. She ordered her usual black coffee without looking at the menu, then gave me the kind of stare that doesn't need words. "You texted me emergency," she said. "What happened?" I stared at my cup. I heard them. Them, my parents, Hannah. The words felt heavy, like pulling wet fabric over my head. They were planning to have me babysit 12 kids at the wedding, during the ceremony, during the reception, without asking me. Kelsey blinked, then let out a sharp laugh, half disbelief, half outrage. "You're kidding." "I wish." She leaned forward, palms on the table. "After everything you've done, you built that wedding from scratch. You've been running on caffeine and obligation for weeks. They're still trying to make you their unpaid help." I nodded, the bitterness rising in my throat. "They said it saves them money. That I'm good with kids." "That's not family," she said, her voice flat. "That's conscription." The word landed like a slap. I almost laughed, but it came out as a shaky exhale. "I thought I was giving them everything they wanted," I said quietly. "The perfect wedding, the perfect weekend. I thought if I did it all right, maybe they'd finally—" I stopped feeling stupid for even saying it. "See you, Kelsey finished for me." I looked down at my hands. Yeah. For a moment, the rain filled the silence between us. The barista turned the sign to closed but didn't rush us. The smell of espresso hung heavy in the air. Kelsey broke the quiet. "You know what your problem is. You think love means earning your spot." I frowned. "That's not what—" She cut me off. "It is. You've been buying their affection in labor hours, cooking, planning, fixing. They keep cashing the checks, but they're never going to pay you back." Her words hurt, because they were true. "What am I supposed to do?" I asked, the exhaustion in my voice startling even me. "Just not show up? Let everything collapse?" Kelsey's expression softened, but her voice didn't. "Mara, it's already collapsing. You're just the only one holding it up." I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The cafe lights reflected in the puddles outside, flickering each time a car passed. For the first time in days, my mind was still. "Then give yourself something for once," she said. I met her eyes. "Like what?" She shrugged. "Peace. Space. A weekend where you're not the family's employee." It sounded impossible. But as she said it, something small in me shifted, like a door I hadn't realized was locked suddenly opening. I pulled the binder closer. Its surface gleamed under the cafe light, and I noticed how it looked more like a business ledger than a scrapbook. Each page was a record of what I'd done for them, hours logged, vendors, coordinated payments made from my account temporarily. A ledger of unpaid debts. Kelsey tilted her head. "What are you thinking?" I didn't answer. My hands were already moving, flipping through the tabs. I reached for my laptop, the screen's glow washing over the binder like moonlight. "Watch this," I said. The first number on my list was the caterer. My stomach tightened as the call connected. "Hi, this is Mara Delaney," I said, keeping my tone even. "I need to cancel the catering order for the Delaney-Hartman wedding this weekend." The woman on the line hesitated. "Cancel the full order." "Yes, please send confirmation to my email." She started to ask why, but I hung up before I could lose my nerve. Kelsey's eyebrows rose. "You just—" "Caterer's gone." I turned to the florist next. The phone rang twice. "Hi, it's Mara again. We won't be needing the arrangements after all." They stammered about deposits and late fees. I told them to send everything to Doug Delaney. My voice didn't shake once. Next came the DJ, then the rental company. Each call was easier than the last. With every cancellation, a thread that had tied me to their expectations snapped cleanly. Kelsey watched in silence, then finally said, "You're really doing it." "I am," I said. Ping, an email. Catering cancellation confirmed. Ping. Floral arrangements voided. Ping. DJ service terminated. Each notification felt like a heartbeat, steady and certain. I wasn't unraveling. I was reassembling myself. Kelsey leaned back, a slow grin spreading across her face. "You've got steel in you, Mara. They don't even know who they're messing with." I smirked, though my pulse still pounded. They'll figure it out soon enough. The rain outside slowed to a drizzle. Somewhere across town, the park where the wedding would be held, sat waiting, bare tables, empty space, all the invisible work I'd done, hanging in the air like a ghost. I opened one final email tab, attached the invoices, and typed out a new message. To Doug Delaney. The subject line blinked at me, a small white box asking for truth. For the first time all night I smiled. Subject yours. I hit send. The laptop screen dimmed as if exhaling. I closed the binder and slid it aside. The rain had stopped completely now. The streets glistened under the street lamps, clean and new. Kelsey raised her cup. To finally choosing yourself. I clinked mine against hers. To making it official. Somewhere in the dark, my phone buzzed a message from home, lighting up the screen. I didn't look. Not yet. The glow from my inbox reflected in the coffee surface a faint shimmer of blue. Each email title looked like a line on a ledger finally closing. For years, I'd balanced their books: time, effort, forgiveness. Tonight, the balance was even. The last thing I saw before the laptop went to sleep was that single word on the screen, yours. And for once, it didn't feel like surrender. It felt like ownership. The boutique hotel sat on a quiet street near downtown Asheville, its brick walls draped in ivy, and the smell of roasted coffee drifting from the lobby cafe. The sign out front glowed soft gold. The overlook and I couldn't help smiling at the name. For the first time in my life, that's exactly what I was doing, stepping back far enough to see everything clearly. The clerk at the front desk looked up as I approached. Checking in, he asked, his voice low and calm. Yes, I said, sliding my ID across the counter. Delaney, 2 nights. He typed something, nodded, then smiled. Spa package and terrace view. You're all set. Elevators to your left. When I reached my room, the door opened onto quiet luxury white linen, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the Blue Ridge Mountains, a balcony washed in afternoon light. I set my small overnight bag on the armchair and exhaled. The silence wrapped around me like a weighted blanket. No floral deadlines, no group texts, no laughter that left me out. Just the hum of distant traffic and the faint scent of lavender from the hotel diffuser. I walked to the window, pressed my palms to the glass, and looked out. The mountains stretched wide and still blue and endless. For the first time in weeks, my heartbeat didn't feel like a timer counting down to someone else's crisis. I unpacked slowly, deliberately, jeans, a soft sweater, a novel I hadn't opened in months. No clipboard, no emergency sewing kit, no heels I'd bought to look professional at my sister's wedding. I left my phone on the dresser face down as if it could absorb the distance I needed. In the bathroom, the mirror fogged slightly from the steam of the tap. I found the folded paper in my purse, my to-do list for the wedding. It was covered in highlighter marks, tiny checkboxes beside each task. Confirm florist delivery. Double-check seating chart. Pick up ribbon. Call DJ backup playlist. Every line was a promise I'd made to keep the peace. Every checkmark was a piece of myself I'd traded for approval. I laid it flat across the sink, the edges curling slightly from wear. Then I struck a match. The flame caught instantly, curling black along the paper's edge. I watched the ink buckle, the names and notes and deadlines melt into smoke that vanished up the vent. For a moment I thought I might feel regret. Instead, there was only stillness. I turned off the faucet, letting the ashes wash away, and whispered, "Good riddance." Back in the main room, I sat on the bed cross-legged and let the quiet fill me. The hotel's air conditioning murmured like soft breath. The curtains shifted in the light breeze. I closed my eyes. I had always imagined rebellion as a firestorm, angry, loud, cinematic. But sitting there, hands open on my lap, I realized how gentle it could be. I thought rebellion would feel loud, I said to myself, but it felt like breathing. I checked the time, Saturday morning. By now they'd be setting up at the park, My parents making small talk with vendors who didn't exist anymore, Hannah rehearsing her vows. A flicker of guilt stirred in my chest, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. I'd given them everything they asked for until they asked for my dignity. My phone buzzed from across the room. I let it go to voicemail. When I finally looked, it was a text from Kelsey. Kelsey. They'll lose it when they find out. I smiled, thumbs hovering above the keyboard for a moment before typing back. Me. Good. The word looked perfect on its own. I hit send, then turned my phone to silent. The spa downstairs was empty when I arrived, save for the quiet trickle of water from a wall fountain. The attendant handed me a robe, and within minutes, I was submerged in a whirlpool scented with eucalyptus. The heat pulled the tension from my shoulders, unwinding weeks of holding everything together. I let my mind wander to what they were doing at that exact moment. Mom fussing with centerpieces that weren't there, Dad pacing Hannah trying to call me with her practiced sweetness. I imagined their confusion turning into panic, then anger, then maybe finally understanding. Maybe not understanding, but recognition. After the massage, I wandered to the rooftop terrace. The city stretched below, all copper roofs and church spires, the air sharp with mountain wind. I ordered a glass of wine and watched the sun sink behind the ridges, painting the horizon in gold and violet. I didn't think of the wedding anymore. I thought about how much time I'd spent being careful, smoothing, apologizing, minimizing. Sure, I can handle it. Don't worry, I've got it. Each one had been a brick in a wall I built around myself, and all it took was one weekend away to see the door standing open. My phone buzzed again, vibrating against the table. I glanced down, saw the name glowing on the screen, Mom calling. For a second, habit tugged at me, the old reflex to answer, to soothe, to fix. But the longer it rang, the less it meant. The ringtone faded into the wind, swallowed by the music from the terrace speakers. I lifted the wine glass, watching the sunset refract through the pale liquid, and whispered, "Not this time." The call ended. Silence reclaimed the air. Down in the valley, church bells began to chime, soft, distant, almost tender. Somewhere, someone's wedding was beginning. But not mine. I turned toward the mountains where the light was fading and let the moment wash over me. The rebellion wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was the sound of nothing breaking inside me for once. The phone buzzed again, persistent, flashing across the screen like a tiny alarm I no longer owed an answer to. I took a slow sip of wine, felt the warmth spread through my chest, and smiled. Then I reached over, turned the phone face down, and let it keep ringing. Sunlight spilled through the terrace curtains, golden and soft, warming the sheets tangled around me. I stretched, the quiet humming in my ears, so different from the noise I used to wake to at home. No phone alerts, no shouted instructions, no one calling my name from the kitchen. Just birds outside and the distant toll of church bells echoing through downtown Asheville. Saturday. The day of Hannah's wedding. I padded barefoot to the balcony, a robe wrapped around me, coffee cup in hand. From up here, the city looked calm, vendors setting up a farmer's market, a man walking his dog, the slow pulse of normal life. Somewhere across town, the Delaney's were probably already in chaos. I inhaled the mountain air and let the thought pass through me without guilt. The bells rang again, faint and far away. I smiled. "Right on schedule," I murmured. Inside, my phone buzzed on the table. Then again, insistent. I ignored it at first, sipping my coffee. The screen lit up with notifications, missed calls, texts, voicemails stacking on top of one another like dominoes. Curiosity finally won. I walked over, flipped the phone, and read the preview of the latest message. "Hannah, where are you?" The caterer didn't show. Mom's freaking out. Another buzz. "Mom, Mara, please, we don't understand. Call us." And another, "Dad, get to the park now." I set the phone down gently, as if it were fragile, and poured myself another cup of coffee from the carafe. Steam curled into the air like a question I had already answered. More alerts vibrated across the table, steady as a heartbeat. I muted them and carried my breakfast plate to the terrace, a croissant, berries, honey butter. The sun was climbing higher, touching the mountain ridges with gold. Somewhere, a brass band from another ceremony played a few streets over. The notes drifted up cheerful and unbothered. I ate slowly, deliberately. For once, I wasn't rushing to meet anyone's deadline. When the phone finally rang again, it wasn't a text, it was a call. Dad. The name flashed bold, demanding. I let it buzz until the screen dimmed, then it lit again and again. On the fourth attempt, I sighed and answered. His voice exploded through the speaker. Mara. What the hell is going on? The caterer canceled, the decorations aren't here. The DJ's saying he never got a confirmation. Do you have any idea what this looks like? I took a bite of croissant. I can imagine. Don't get smart with me. You need to get down here right now and fix this. I stood at the railing looking out at the clouds shifting over the hills. I can't, I said evenly. I have plans. Mara. His voice cracked with fury. This is your sister's wedding. You're ruining everything. No, I said, quiet but firm. I planned everything. You ruined it when you decided I was your babysitter. There was silence on the line, followed by a shaky breath, then the low, desperate sound of my mother's voice filtering through the speaker. Mara, please, sweetheart. Your sister's in tears. The kids are running wild. The guests are arriving. We can't do this without you. My grip on the railing tightened. For a moment, the old instinct rose up to fix it, to save them, to smooth everything over, like always. I could almost see Mom's trembling hands, Dad's flushed face, Hannah's panicked smile. But the thought didn't break me this time. It steadied me. You're right, I said softly. You can't do this without me. You should have thought about that before you decided I didn't matter. Mara. Dad started, but I cut him off. You planned this without me, I said, voice calm as glass. Now you can manage it without me. The silence that followed was raw, stretching too long. Then came the sound of muffled chaos behind them, children shouting something, clattering, a woman's voice rising in confusion. Dad's tone shifted, the authority bleeding out of it, replaced by panic. Mara, listen. Be reasonable. We'll pay you back for whatever deposits you lost. Just come help. Please. Mom's sobs came through faintly. Honey, we just wanted the day to be perfect. It was never my day, I said. I ended the call. The phone buzzed again immediately, but I didn't look. I turned it over so the screen faced down, the vibration dull against the wood. Then I set my plate aside, folded the napkin neatly, and exhaled. The sound of my own breathing filled the space where their voices had been. It felt foreign at first, too quiet, then it felt good. Across town, the chaos bloomed. My phone vibrated again and again, a mechanical heartbeat narrating the unraveling in real time. I could almost picture it like a movie scene, kids racing through the aisles, flower petals trampled into mud, guests whispering, wondering why everything felt unfinished. Dad barking orders, Mom trying to smile through tears. Hannah standing in her white dress, face flushed with panic, realizing that every piece of the wedding she'd taken for granted was gone. I could almost hear the sound of her voice echoing across the park, sharp, panicked, breaking. For a moment, I let myself feel the sting of it. Not guilt, just the truth of what happens when a structure built on one person's silence finally collapses. The silence in the hotel was heavier now, but not empty. It was clean. I poured another cup of coffee, walked back to the bed, and picked up the robe from the chair. The morning light had softened, the bells had stopped. I could still hear the faint hum of the city below, life going on unbothered. My phone buzzed once more, but I didn't check it. I knew what waited there, anger turning to confusion, confusion turning to pleading. It would come full circle soon enough. I gathered my things, room key, book, sunglasses, and slipped them into my bag. As I left, I glanced back at the phone, still face down, trembling like something alive, trying to crawl back into relevance. Not this time. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, the lobby filling with the quiet strains of instrumental music. The air smelled like coffee and clean linen. Good morning, the receptionist said as I passed. It really is, I said, and meant it. I stepped into the spa, where the sound of water replaced the echoes of shouting that still lingered faintly in my mind. The receptionist smiled and handed me a robe. "Massage or facial first?" she asked. "Surprise me," I said, my voice steady, almost light. As I followed her inside, the last vibration of my phone finally stopped. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full. For the first time in my life, I chose peace over guilt, and it sounded like nothing at all. Morning sunlight slanted through the glass, thin and pale after the rain. The city below moved at half-speed, delivery trucks unloading bread, joggers cutting through puddles, someone whistling a tune I didn't recognize. The chaos of yesterday felt far away, like a story that had finally reached its last chapter. I sat on the balcony with a blanket draped around my shoulders, sipping coffee that had gone lukewarm, scrolling through the avalanche of messages lighting up my phone. It had taken me 10 minutes to even turn it on. The first text came from Aunt Caroline. "Caroline. Heard about yesterday. They had it coming. Proud of you." I blinked at the screen, half expecting sarcasm, but there was none. Caroline was the only one in the family who'd ever told the truth out loud. Her message landed like a balm, simple, unsentimental, right to the point. Then came another. "Ryan. Hey. I'm sorry. I should have said something when they brought up the babysitting thing. I didn't think they'd actually do it." I read the words twice, feeling a quiet weight settle in my chest. Ryan wasn't dramatic. For him to send that meant something had cracked. "Me. Thanks. It's okay. I get it." His reply came quick. "Ryan. No, it's not okay. Dad's furious at Uncle Doug. People left before the cake was even cut. I think Hannah's blaming everyone but herself." I stared at the screen, the words blurring slightly. People left before the cake was even cut. I pictured the scene like a movie reel, folding chairs, half-empty kids, chasing each other through the mud, napkins fluttering across tables bare of food or flowers, guests murmuring polite excuses, a photographer trying to salvage a few shots that didn't look like disaster. Somewhere in the middle of it, I could see Hannah's face, red, bewildered, still convinced that everything was someone else's fault. The next few messages came from people I barely spoke to, cousins, family friends, even an old neighbor. Each text was a variation of the same stunned refrain. "Heard about the wedding. Can't believe it. Your parents are saying the vendors canceled last minute. Is that true? Wow, Mara. Bold move. About time." The mix of pity, awe, and gossip didn't surprise me. Families like ours thrived on appearance, and yesterday had shattered the illusion cleanly. There was no hiding a public failure that large. I set the phone down beside my coffee and leaned on the railing, watching the light slide over the roofs below. The air was crisp, faintly metallic. Asheville after rain always smelled like renewal, wet pavement, pine, the faint sweetness of bakery sugar from the cafe downstairs. For once, I didn't feel like the villain of anyone's story, just someone who'd stepped out of the wrong script. I thought of all the nights I'd stayed up tweaking playlists, calculating serving sizes, trying to anticipate every possible disaster so they could pretend their world was effortless. I'd done that for years, not just for the wedding, but for birthdays, reunions, Christmas dinners. If something beautiful existed in that family, I'd probably built it. And yesterday, when I didn't show up, the scaffolding fell. They never built anything without me, and now everyone sees it. I whispered the thought into the air, not triumphant, just factual. It didn't taste like victory. It tasted like truth. The phone buzzed again. Another message from Caroline. "Caroline. For what it's worth, the kids had fun. Everyone else looked miserable." A laugh caught in my throat, short, startled. I typed back, "Guess that makes one success." She sent a single thumbs-up emoji, and that was that. The rest of the morning moved quietly. I packed my things without rush, folded the robe, unplugged the charger, set the empty coffee cup in the sink. The hotel smelled faintly of eucalyptus and new linen, and it struck me how different this version of silence felt. It wasn't heavy. It was space I'd earned. By noon, I was driving back toward my apartment on the east side of town. The roads were slick but clear. I rolled the windows down halfway, letting the cold air sting my cheeks. The closer I got to home, the lighter I felt. When I walked through my door, the quiet greeted me like an old friend. My plants drooped a little from neglect. The air smelled faintly of dust and rosemary. I set my suitcase by the couch and sank into it, still in my coat. The phone buzzed again, another message. This one from Ryan. Ryan, Uncle Doug's trying to spin it like the vendors betrayed them. Everyone knows that's not true. People are talking. Me. Let them. Ryan. You okay? I paused before typing back. Me. Better than I've ever been. Tiptiaish Simon SD. He didn't reply, but a few minutes later, a photo came through of the park. The grass was trampled, the gazebo stripped bare. A few folding chairs still sat in crooked rows, puddles reflecting the cloudy sky. In the background, a stack of styrofoam sandwich trays sat on a picnic table, half open, soggy at the edges. I stared at it for a long moment, not out of satisfaction but clarity. There it was, the cost of pretending someone else's effort was free. I closed the photo, placed the phone face down, and leaned back on the couch. The hum of the fridge filled the quiet. I could hear kids playing somewhere outside, laughter echoing off brick walls. It was a different kind of music than the bells yesterday, real, unplanned, alive. My chest felt light. For once, I didn't have to fix anything. The afternoon slipped by, unnoticed, sunlight crawling across the hardwood. Around 3, I started a pot of tea, humming under my breath. The steam fogged the window for a moment, blurring the skyline into watercolor. I thought maybe that was it, the ending. Maybe peace was just the absence of noise. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps against the door, quick and familiar. My stomach tightened before my mind caught up. I glanced toward the peephole. Hannah. She stood on the landing in a pale coat, hair pulled into a tight bun, eyes ringed dark from sleeplessness. In her hands, she clutched a crumpled envelope. The kettle whistled behind me, high and shrill, but I didn't move. Another knock. Louder this time. I took one slow breath, the air thick with steam and déjà vu, and whispered to myself, "So it begins." The knock came again, softer this time. I turned off the kettle, letting the whistle fade into silence. My reflection in the microwave door looked calm enough, hair loose, eyes steady, but my heart still thudded against my ribs. I walked to the door, turned the lock, and opened it. Hannah stood there, shoulders tight beneath her cream coat. She looked smaller than I remembered, makeup smudged, eyes red. Her voice cracked on the first word. "We need to talk." I stepped aside without answering. She hesitated, then walked in, heels clicking across the hardwood. The faint smell of rain and perfume followed her. I closed the door but didn't offer her a seat. She turned to face me, clutching the envelope like a lifeline. "You humiliated us," she said, her voice trembling between accusation and disbelief. "You just disappeared. No catering, no decorations, everyone was talking about it. Mom cried the whole night. Dad's furious." I folded my arms. "No," I said evenly. "I stopped covering for you." Her mouth fell open. "That's not fair. We were counting on you." "You were using me," I corrected. "You decided I'd spend your wedding babysitting 12 kids while you toasted champagne. You didn't ask. You assumed." She flinched but pressed on. "We were stressed, Mara. Weddings are chaos. You know how Mom gets. She just wanted everything perfect, and you, well, you're good at fixing things. We thought you'd understand." I laughed quietly, shaking my head. "You thought I'd fold like always, that I'd smile through it and thank you for letting me be part of your big day." Her voice sharpened. "You didn't have to ruin it to make a point." "I didn't ruin it," I said, my tone still calm. "I just stopped pretending your comfort was my responsibility." Hannah dropped the envelope onto the counter with a thud. "Do you have any idea what that day meant to me?" I waited my whole life for it. You made me look like a fool. You did that yourself, I said softly. You built your dream on borrowed hands. And the moment those hands stopped working, it all fell apart. Her lip trembled. You're being cruel. No, I said. I'm being honest. There's a difference. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The rain tapped against the window, a slow rhythm that filled the space between our words. Finally, she took a shaky breath. I love you, Mara. We all do. You're my sister. Can't we just move past this? The words might have once softened me, but now they only sounded rehearsed. If your love requires my silence, I said quietly, it's not love, it's employment. Her face changed, then something brittle cracking beneath the surface. You don't mean that. I do. Hannah's eyes shimmered with anger and grief all at once. You're twisting everything. We've always helped each other. That's what family does. Helping. I said stepping closer is a choice. What you've done is expectation dressed up as love. There's a difference between leaning on someone and standing on them. She blinked fast, her throat working to hold back tears. I didn't realize you hated us so much. I don't hate you, I said, but I can't keep loving you in a way that erases me. The silence stretched. I watched her glance around my apartment, the tidy kitchen, the calm hum of the heater, the absence of chaos. Maybe she noticed how different the air felt here. Maybe she realized this was what peace looked like. Hannah's voice dropped to a whisper. Mom says you'll regret this someday. Maybe, I said, but I'd rather regret walking away than spend another decade kneeling. Her chin trembled. You're making it sound like we're monsters. No, I said. Just people who got used to being served. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she reached for the envelope, opening it with shaking hands. I brought this for you, she murmured, pulling out a folded photo, the four of us from last Christmas, standing in front of the fireplace. I thought maybe it would remind you of what matters. I looked at it. My family's smiles beamed under the garland, perfectly staged. My own smile in the corner was smaller, tired. Even in that frozen moment, I looked like the one holding everything in place. It does remind me, I said quietly, handing it back. It reminds me why I stopped pretending. She took it, fingers trembling. You've changed. I finally started telling the truth. Something in her posture sagged. For the first time, I saw her not as the golden daughter, but as a woman out of her depth, someone who'd never had to examine the foundation beneath her comfort. Her tears came quietly, then streaking through her mascara. I didn't mean for it to go that way, she whispered. I just wanted a perfect day. I nodded. And you got an honest one instead. She pressed her lips together, holding back a sob. Mom won't forgive you. I'm not asking her to. She took a step toward the door, clutching the photo to her chest. I don't know how to fix this. You don't have to, I said. You just have to live with it. Her hand hovered over the doorknob for a moment. She turned back, eyes pleading. I wish you'd come. I did, I said. Just not where you wanted me. Hannah swallowed hard, blinked once more, and opened the door. The hallway light washed her face pale. She hesitated like she might say something else, but nothing came. Then she left. The door clicked shut behind her, the sound crisp and final. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the wood grain, my heartbeat slowing, until the quiet filled the space completely. Then I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like gravity had finally let go. I turned off the lights, made myself a cup of tea, and sank into the couch. The apartment was still. No phone buzzing, no footsteps pacing the floor, no voices asking what else I could do. Just silence, clean earned and mine. For the first time in years, I breathed without holding my breath for someone else. By the time autumn settled over Asheville, the whispers had grown legs. You couldn't walk into a coffee shop or farmer's market without catching someone saying the words "that wedding." Aunt Caroline called it the fiasco, which felt kinder than what most people called it: the meltdown, the disaster, the lesson. I met Caroline at a small cafe near my new studio one Thursday morning. She arrived in her usual navy coat, punctual and unbothered, ordered black coffee, and slid into the booth across from me with that blunt expression I'd come to love. "Doug and Lydia are having a hell of a time," she said without preamble. "Half the church committee stopped speaking to them. Your mother's garden club canceled their fall luncheon at her house. And your father, well, apparently, he's been avoiding the Rotary meetings altogether." I stirred my tea slowly. Because of the wedding. Because of the spectacle, she corrected. Word got around about the missing food, the sandwich trays, the crying kids. And when your father blamed the vendors blamed him right back. No one wants their name tied to that family anymore. You can't buy your way out of humiliation that public. Her tone wasn't cruel, just factual. It made me think of the way she'd texted me the day after the wedding they had it coming. I leaned back, letting the warmth from the mug seep into my palms. "They'll survive," I said quietly. Caroline nodded. "Probably, but not unchanged. Even Ryan stopped going to Sunday dinners after your dad yelled at him for taking your side. He told me it was the first time he'd seen your mother cry at the table. The image landed like a pebble in water ripples, spreading small but inevitable. For years, I'd been the one absorbing that impact, swallowing my anger to keep the family surface still. Now that I'd stepped back, every hidden fracture was visible." Caroline watched me for a moment. "You're quiet," she said. "I just thought they'd bounce back faster," I admitted. "They've always been good at pretending." "They will," she said, sipping her coffee. "But not before learning who really kept their world running." Her words warmed me more than the tea did. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "Your mother wanted me to give you this." I hesitated, then took it. The paper was thick, the handwriting familiar, Lydia's looping cursive that had once labeled every holiday tin in her pantry. I unfolded it slowly. "Mara, I don't understand you anymore." "Mom." No greeting, no closing, no accusation beyond the line itself. It was almost elegant in its confusion. I stared at it for a long time before folding it back up. "She's right," I said finally. "She doesn't." "Are you going to respond?" Caroline asked. I shook my head. "There's nothing to explain that they're ready to hear." She nodded, satisfied. "Then keep moving forward. You've got better things to build." And I did. That afternoon, I walked to my new workspace, a narrow studio tucked above a bookstore downtown. The rent was cheap. The paint still smelled new, and sunlight poured in through the big front window that overlooked Market Square. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The walls were covered in fabric swatches and color palettes, pinned alongside photos of venues and handwritten notes. My drafting table was littered with pencils, ribbons, and the faint chaos of creation. Where my old wedding binder had once lived, there was now a corkboard labeled Lane Design Co., a name that carried me, not them. I lost track of time there, sketching layouts for a winter fundraiser, a client who'd found me through a mutual friend. They wanted warmth and community, not perfection. Every design choice felt like rewriting my own history, proof that you could create beauty without erasing yourself in the process. In the corner, a stack of business cards waited to be mailed out. Mara Delaney. Event design and coordination. No family logos, no shared credit. Just me. Days turned into weeks. Bookings came in slowly at first, then faster. A small arts nonprofit hired me for a gala. A couple planning a vow renewal reached out after seeing my photos online. Word spread quietly but persistently. The same town that had gossiped about the Delaney wedding now whispered about the woman who walked away from it and built something better. Sometimes when I passed the park where the wedding had fallen apart, I caught glimpses of new couples taking engagement photos. The gazebo had been repainted. The grass had grown back. But every time I saw it, I thought not of failure, but of freedom. One night as I was closing up the studio, I glanced at my phone. A new message blinked at the top of the screen. Unknown number. Unknown. Saw your name mentioned in the Citizen Times today. You're getting a reputation, Ms. Delaney. My heart gave a small startled jump. I opened my laptop, searched the paper's site, and there it was, Asheville's rising event designer, from family lessons to community vision. The preview line read, "After an infamous local wedding collapsed, one woman found success by reimagining what grace under pressure really looks like." For a second, I just stared at it, half laughing under my breath. The irony was sharp and perfect. All that effort to keep our family spotless, and here I was flourishing because of the stain. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. Outside, the city lights flickered on, scattering gold across the wet pavement. Somewhere below, a busker strummed a guitar, his music soft and slow. My phone buzzed again, this time with a local number. The display read, "Asheville Citizen Times." I hesitated, then answered. "Ms. Delaney," a woman's voice said, "this is Tori Evans from the paper. We're running a feature on local women entrepreneurs. Could I get a few quotes from you about your journey, how you turned setbacks into success?" My mouth curved into a quiet smile. "Sure," I said. "I think I can find the words." As I hung up, I looked around the studio one more time, the pinned sketches, the soft lamplight, the faint hum of possibility. Outside, the mountains faded into dusk, and for the first time in a long time, the horizon looked exactly like a beginning. 6 months later, the city buzzed with spring. Dogwoods bloomed along the sidewalks, and Market Square shimmered under strings of lights that my team had hung that morning. The community arts fundraiser was our biggest project yet, a night of live music, local crafts, and a silent auction for the youth center. My company's name, Lane Design Cone, gleamed from a simple banner over the entrance. Inside the event hall, volunteers moved like clockwork under my direction, not out of fear or family duty, but because they trusted me to lead. I moved from table to table, adjusting flowers, checking sound levels, and laughing with the college interns who'd joined us for the semester. Every detail felt purposeful, not performative. "Table 6 needs more candles," someone called. "On it," I said, tying my apron tighter. "Keep the aisle clear for the servers." The music test began, a jazz trio warming up on the stage, and for a moment I just stood there taking it all in. The air hummed with quiet energy, the kind that comes from shared effort. No one expected me to hold the world together alone. I wasn't the family's fixer anymore. I was a leader among equals. Kelsey arrived just before sunset, her press badge swinging from her lanyard. She'd been covering the arts scene lately, and I could tell she loved being back in motion. She slipped past the volunteers and found me near the buffet, clipboard in hand. "Look at you," she said, grinning. "The Delaney who actually built something that didn't collapse." I laughed. "Low bar, but I'll take it." She scanned the room, the draped lights, the laughter, the smell of roasted vegetables and sweet tea. "Feels strange setting tables again?" she asked, teasing. "Not really," I said, glancing at the volunteers arranging centerpieces. "This time I chose who sits at them." Kelsey's smile softened. "And you did good." We walked the perimeter of the room together, pausing to watch a group of kids paint small canvases for the auction. The walls were lined with local art, bright, messy, alive. In one corner, a mother helped her son glue sequins to a paper sun, both of them laughing. "It's funny," Kelsey said quietly. "You used to plan events for people who never looked you in the eye. Now you're doing it for people who actually see you." I nodded, the truth of it sinking deep. That's the only kind of work worth doing. She gave my arm a squeeze, then disappeared into the crowd, with her camera already scanning for the best angle. The evening unfolded seamlessly. Guests mingled, the band found its rhythm, and the auction bids climbed higher than anyone expected. My volunteers moved gracefully, refilling glasses, clearing plates, laughing in the way people do when they know their efforts matter. I wasn't watching for mistakes. I was witnessing teamwork. Around 9, as the final performance ended, I stepped outside to catch my breath. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of honeysuckle. Across the square, the mountains stood dark and steady. I thought about how many years I'd spent inside rooms just like this, serving other people's visions, waiting for permission to step into my own. Now I didn't need anyone's approval to feel proud. A small voice pulled me from my thoughts. "Aunt Mara." I turned. Near the entrance stood a little girl in a pale yellow dress holding a piece of folded paper in both hands. My chest tightened when I recognized her Hannah's daughter, Emma. "Hey, kiddo," I said gently. "What are you doing here?" She smiled shyly and stepped forward. "Mom brought me. She said you made the lights and the pretty tables." My heart stumbled over the image Hannah out there somewhere, maybe standing in the crowd, maybe watching from a distance. "That's right," I said. "I helped a little." Emma handed me the paper. "Mom said to give you this." I unfolded it carefully. Inside, drawn in colored markers, was a picture of a big table with chairs all around it. Above, in uneven letters, she'd written, "Thank you for helping Mom learn." For a second, the noise of the event faded, replaced by the low rush of memory, the sound of my sister's voice breaking in my apartment months ago, the slam of the door, the silence that followed. I felt the echo of it in my chest softened now into something like peace. I crouched down to Emma's level. "That's a beautiful drawing," I said. "You're really talented." She grinned. "Mom helped a little. Of course she did." I folded the paper and slipped it into my pocket. "Will you tell your mom I said thank you?" She nodded, then ran off toward the snack table, her laughter trailing behind her like a ribbon. I stood there for a while. The note warm in my palm, the night air wrapping around me like forgiveness. Maybe Hannah wasn't ready for a real apology yet. Maybe she didn't need to say anything. Sometimes change shows up as a child's drawing and a quiet gesture through the crowd. When I finally went back inside, the band was playing a slow, joyful tune. Kelsey caught my eye from across the room and mouthed, "You okay?" I nodded, smiling. "More than okay." The fundraiser closed with applause and hugs, volunteers high-fiving guests, dropping donations into glass jars. When the last chair was stacked and the lights dimmed, I stayed behind, wiping down one of the long wooden tables. My reflection shimmered faintly in its polished surface, tired, proud, whole. This time I chose who sits at them, I whispered again, running my hand along the grain. Outside, the square glowed under streetlights, alive with music and chatter. I locked up the studio keys, slung my bag over my shoulder, and walked toward home, the folded paper still tucked in my pocket. It rustled softly with each step like a small heartbeat, steady, patient, alive. Legacy. I realized wasn't about revenge. It was about what grows after you stop watering what hurts you. Dawn crept slowly over the Blue Ridge, the sky a watercolor of lavender and peach. The light pooled across my studio floor, catching the edges of fabric swatches and paper sketches like spilled gold. The room smelled faintly of coffee and pine cleaner, a strange but comforting mix. It was the anniversary week of the wedding, though I hadn't thought about it until the date blinked up from my laptop calendar. The memory no longer felt like a wound, just a line item in a ledger long since closed. I sat at my drafting table, the same one I'd rescued from a thrift shop, and sanded myself. On the screen, my accounting software glowed softly, Lane Design Company Fiscal Year Summary. Profit, rent, payroll. Each number was its own small miracle. The business had grown faster than I dared imagine, steady clients, community partnerships, 3 part-time staff members who laughed more than they complained. The columns balanced perfectly down to the cent. I smiled. I'd spent years trying to balance people. Balancing books was easier. The early light touched the corkboard beside me. It was crowded now, thank you cards from clients, sketches from the fundraiser, photos of smiling volunteers, and in the center, pinned neatly, was Emma's drawing. The one with the table and the words written in bright marker, "Thank you for helping Mom learn." I reached out and straightened its edge. My fingers brushed the paper, the crayon texture faint but real. It reminded me that healing doesn't always announce itself. It just starts showing up in quieter details. Shared laughter, shorter silences, the way guilt no longer drags behind every choice. My phone buzzed once with an early text from Kelsey Breakfast, later I'm buying this time. I smiled, typing back, sure, but I'm leaving the tip. Then I turned back to the numbers on the screen and opened a blank document titled Budget, Personal. I'd been itemizing my life lately, not in money, but in meaning. Expenses. Time wasted trying to please everyone. Hours spent explaining kindness to people who didn't want to learn it. Nights awake rewording apologies that shouldn't have been mine. Income mornings without dread. Clients who see me. A niece's drawing. Peace that doesn't need permission. The net balance glowed invisible, but solid. Freedom paid in full. I leaned back, watching the sun inch higher. The city below was just waking delivery trucks, rumbling a cyclist cutting through the quiet streets, birds tracing lazy circles over Market Square. Life moving forward as it always does. But this time, I was part of it, not orbiting around someone else's expectations. I clicked open another file, Donations and Outreach. The cursor blinked at the bottom, waiting for a new entry. For weeks, I'd been debating what to do with the extra income from the fundraiser. Part of me thought about reinvesting, maybe a second office or new equipment. But another part, the one that still remembered the exhaustion of starting from nothing, knew exactly where it should go. I opened my checkbook, wrote slowly, and smiled as the ink soaked through the paper. The amount wasn't enormous, but it was real, earned, and enough to start something that mattered. Pay to the order of Asheville Women's Business Collective. Memo: the Delaney Fund, a small scholarship for women starting independent creative businesses, seed money for the ones who were told they should just help out instead of lead. I could already picture the first recipient, some 20-something designer with bright eyes and no roadmap, clutching her first contract with trembling hands. I wanted her to know someone believed in her. I sealed the envelope, added a return address, and propped it by the door with the outgoing mail. The studio clock ticked softly, steady as breath. The light had shifted fully now, spilling warmth across the desk, across me. I reached for my mug, now half empty and cold, and took one last sip anyway. I thought about my parents sometimes, not with anger anymore, just distance. Word was they'd stopped hosting dinner parties. The neighborhood gossip had moved on. Ryan told me Dad still stiffened when my name came up, but Mom had started volunteering at the community center, helping organize small events. Maybe the silence had taught her something too. Maybe not. Either way, it wasn't my burden anymore. The doorbell chimed faintly, just the postman making rounds downstairs. The sound faded quickly, swallowed by morning. I turned off the lamp, closed the accounting program, and sat there in the soft quiet. They used to say freedom was selfish, that independence meant abandonment. But sitting here surrounded by sunlight and proof of my own survival, I understood how wrong they were. They thought freedom was selfish, I said aloud, voice steady in the empty room. Turns out, it's the cleanest form of love. Love that didn't drain. Love that didn't ask for performance or apology. Love that simply existed because I chose it. I stood stretching the wooden floor warm under my feet. Outside, the mail truck idled by the curb. I slipped the envelope into my bag, stepped into the hall, and locked the studio behind me. The air smelled of rain lifting from stone, the city stirring awake. At the corner mailbox, I paused. The sun caught the metal just right, gleaming like something ceremonial. I slid the envelope through the slot, heard it drop cleanly, and smiled. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even redemption. It was just the quiet satisfaction of knowing the story had rewritten itself line by line, item by item, into something whole. I walked back toward the studio lights spilling down the street, my shadow long and certain behind me. For the first time, I didn't need anyone to look to prove I was seen. I didn't ruin their wedding. I just stopped setting the table for people who never saved me a seat. Mara exhales, the morning sun spilling over her studio as the camera lingers on the mailed envelope and the quiet peace she's built. Her story isn't about vengeance, it's about freedom earned, not granted. If this story resonated, tell us in the comments below. We read every comment. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of courage, clarity, and redemption. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Radiance. We'll see you next time.